Last time we spoke to you about trends that we're expecting to see in Q4 of this year. We're following up on that today with a conversation around salary and compensation. We've actually put together a compensation guide for the remainder of 24 going into 25 for those that are resource planning or coming up to appraisals. We wanted to give a little bit of context to that salary guide and just talk to you about some of the trends and points that we have seen in the market. I think we all remember the bidding wars of 2022. And I think when we take that into context, where there was inflationary salaries happening in the market, we wanted to maybe look now 24 months on and see what impact that has had. And I think when you look at that, Cheryl, in terms of the impact 24 months on, what have you seen?
So naturally, I think we saw the biggest impact on financially and time-wise on the newly qualified up to about 2 years post-qualified experience. Salaries peaked in 2022. We saw newly quals coming into the market at over 70, 75k in some instances. That has now settled, luckily, and we're now back to what has been an increase since pre-COVID times. So salaries now for newly quals are starting at around 60, 65 for buy side. But the impact wasn't just felt at that level, right? So it wasn't just then salaries and time increases. So it didn't just cost you more to hire at that level. It didn't just cost you more time to get the right people because things move so quickly. There was a consideration for the wider talent in those teams that were being hired into. So those that were arguably the landing point for those newly qualified talents and those junior talents to come into those teams. Now, we have seen over the course of 2023 and 24, those sort of 2 to 3 years plus salaries have increased, not peaking at the same increase that we saw in 2022, but certainly in line with inflation and the cost of living pieces, which is great news, and that needed to happen. On the more senior end of the market, so we're talking sort of 5, 7 years plus, closing in on those FD CFO seats, compensation overall has increased. What has changed is the setting. So we're not necessarily seeing huge increases on the basics, but what we are absolutely seeing is companies getting far more creative around equity and carry and share options, as well as LTIPs. And over to you, Andrew, on that point. So what have you particularly seen or identified as some of the trends in terms of increases around that and the movers and the shakers in the market?
Yeah, I think, just to continue the deferred compensation point, I think you're absolutely right in that firms are being more creative in awarding equity and LTIPs in order to ultimately retain talent. I think this is the issue that firms are trying to now address, is the retention piece. There's attraction of talent, but then there's the retention of that. Now, given that we're in a very inflationary market with high volatility, that deferred component can look very different. So I think what firms are now starting to realize is that they need to do more review of the deferred to ensure that individuals are actually going to realize value from that deferred piece of their package. So that's one point. I think when we look at salaries at the more senior end, maybe where we've seen the notable increases is probably people that are transitioning from a small mid-cap firm into a scaling business, where the complexity of the role around operational and regulatory and then creating the processes and controls for scale means that they need to attract the top talent to do that. And I think we've seen probably a 23% increase of salaries for that particular move. So if you're a small firm, you're at risk of losing your top talent to those scaling businesses, and then the larger firms are probably struggling to compete from a salary point of view. Thirdly, then, I think when we look at the gender pay, which is a component of our compensation guide, it's still a huge issue in the market, particularly across buy side. I think when the mega caps with their D&I policies are probably addressing this better. But I think outside of that, if you look at lack of female leadership and the return of females to work from their maternity leave, there's still a huge disparity. And I think it's something that we're trying to, speak to companies about, that they really do need to address that still further. So that's some of the points that we're probably seeing at the more senior end of the market.
Amazing. It was really, really interesting data that we're sort of compiling there, and all the detailed breakdowns are actually in our salary guide. So for anyone who's interested in understanding the complexity, the detail and the breakdowns of any of that data, please do reach out to us. We will send you the document across, and for any follow-up questions or discussion points or advisories around how to tackle some of the challenges, please reach out and we'll be more than happy to help.